Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagatcha Akanda Rupa Stitir Eva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. They declare, there shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. May that Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. We welcome you to what we think is about the 13th class, Lucky 13, and this series on the Avadhut and his non-dual teachings, declared in the Avadhut Gita, chapter 3, verse 3 through 43. There are about 40 verses there which form a chalisa, and we've given it several names: Gyanamritam Stotram, or the Avadhuta Stotram. It's of incomparable non-dual status, is how I described it this morning in a God blog that's going to be posted tomorrow, if you want to watch for that. 5 of those a week we put up on these special subjects and excellent topics of the Vedanta, particularly, as we like to say nowadays, the Neo-Vedanta, how it has matured itself and shown its radiant face since Swami Vivekananda has come to the West and chosen the Vedanta Darshana, which is one of 6 orthodox darshanas in India, to bring to us and to enlighten us, to illumine our thinking process, as we just said. And that's done through Brahman. One of the things I was writing about today and reading Holy Mother, she said that Brahman is only realized in the spirit. Brahman is never realized in the world. So that's like Swami Asheshanandaji Maharaj, our Guru, peace and bliss be upon him, saying, you cannot get to the infinite through the finite. Or beings cannot, you cannot realize your true nature through temporary phenomena, things that are going on. You have to realize it in the real during the moments of your deepest contemplations in meditation, where you come upon that divine presence, which we wish our parents had taught us about, and the society had have been more illumined about, because that is called enlightenment. I just chanted from Shankara's scriptures. If you remain in constant recognition of the fact. So, in a sense, it's sort of a concession that non-duality gives you. Non-duality being very difficult to hold on to, is that they don't expect you to remember your true self in all circumstances, under all circumstances, and in every trial and tribulation, and during all the suffering, and what to speak of bliss and elation, happiness, and so forth, is that tends to fade to the background. That's rather its nature, as does Divine Mother of the Universe. But the conscious effort to bring her forward and to bring her non-dual philosophy forward is the great effort that we make that must be constant day to day, so that this remembrance, divine remembrance, Daivi Smrita, becomes a fact in our life, and pretty soon it becomes as much as a habit as forgetting was a habit earlier. So don't forget to remember your Divine Mother's beautiful name, Sri Durganam Buluna, 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 is one beautiful song in Bengal. So what brings it to our attention so that we can scrutinize it more is Sangha, and being in a company with gurus and acharyas, with seers, and our own studies of the revealed scriptures, which are the Shruti, or the proof, Pramana, Shrutaya Pramana, I just chanted. They're the proof of this, gotten from, I say gleaned, but someone didn't know what that meant yesterday when I was talking, but gleaned or harvested, might say, getting the essence from something, from these non-dual scriptures, which have come from the direct spiritual experience of the seers, not from reading books only, and also not just from hearsay from their teachers who had direct spiritual experience, but it came from their own experience. Therefore, we value it greatly. And the Avadhut is one of these beings whose advice, whose teachings we value greatly. You approach, if you're one of those fortunate ones who are seeking truth or freedom, or even peace of mind, then you come to the Guru or to the Acharya, and you get the transmission of the Jnana wisdom. And then that sets you up for this non-dual truth eventually. And for that, as I was reading again, Holy Mother today said that that only comes by the grace of God. And so some people write to me saying, can't you bestow illumination upon me? I said, well, that comes from grace, and that only comes from Divine Mother when the moment is right and you've prepared yourself for it. It's what the opening slokas of the Avadhut Gita are about. And last week I came upon that urge to share them with you, because we're only taking 40 out of the 3rd chapter, when in this 15 class series, I'm saying it's going to probably be 15 classes. We have this week and 2 more weeks to conclude it. And this is the 13th class, but I've never really read I've chanted a few other slokas out of it that have gone by. Maybe you didn't know that they were out of this scripture. It and its companion, called the Ashtavakra Samhita. But I didn't actually cite a few slokas. So I wanted to read to you the opening 7 slokas and give you a feel for how he dives into the subject and how the seers are listening to him. He says, Ishvara anugraha deva pumsam advaita vasana mahadbhaya paritranat vipranam upajayate. That's the first opening Sanskrit sloka of the Avadhut Gita. And it says, through the grace of God alone, the desire for non-duality arises in wise beings and saves them from the great fear. So the great fear is not just death, as it's usually translated in the Gita when Sri Krishna mentions it, but it's the fear of the mind betraying you and becoming depressed, becoming confused, and becoming too emotional, and maybe even falling into ignorance of the truth, which it can easily do, as you can see in the case of probably millions of beings on this earth today, ignorance of their true nature. So this is what Ishvara Anugrahad Eva Pumsam Advaita Vasana means. Advaita Vasana, it's almost a contradiction in terms that you would put non-duality together with the word Vasana, which means desire. But the desire for non-duality arises in those wise beings only by the grace of God, and therefore saves them from this great fear. So that's why I say you would get an initiation into a path, you'd get a very fine guru who could transfer you the Jnana wisdom, not just show you how to meditate alone, not just give you some devotional exercises like rituals, and not just maybe school you maybe in how to serve others, which is all good, the other 3 yogas. But if you want this, if you have this strong desire for knowing yourself, and that's why I mentioned our parents in society right now, because there are very few people. Where do you go to hear the non-dual truth? Where have you ever heard it in your life spoken? Until probably you came to a Jnana Guru and he said, well, crack this book, look at this scripture, let's hear the words of this particular illumined soul on the subject. It's called non-duality. So that's the first sloka, and I stopped for commentary on it because it's the opening sloka. So it's beautiful that if you yourself have had a desire to know beyond relativity, to know outside of nature, to know beyond the boring ego and the troublesome personalities of people. If you've had that desire, then God's grace has come upon you, and non-duality is in your future, you see, if not already upon you. For us here, and for those looking on who are interested, it is upon us right now, in this very moment. So let me read slokas 2 through 7 to give you a taste for, and then I'll sing slokas 34 through 37. How shall I salute the formless being, indivisible, auspicious, and immutable, who fills all this with his self, and also fills the self with his self? The universe composed of the 5 elements is like water in a mirage. Oh, to whom shall I make obeisance, I who am one and taintless? All is verily the absolute self. Distinction and non-distinction do not exist. How can I say it exists or it does not exist? I am filled with wonder. The essence of the whole of Vedanta is this knowledge, this supreme knowledge, that I am by nature the formless, all-pervasive self. There is no doubt that I am that God who is the self in all, pure, indivisible like the sky, naturally stainless. I am indeed immutable and infinite, and of the form of pure intelligence. I do not know how or in relation to whom joy and sorrow exist. And that's a good segue place into the subtitle of this class, meaning, do not weep, do not drop tears on your own divine feet. Come to realize who you are and be in gratitude and be in elation for your true nature, as obviously he has and is living in that state. Does he sound like a man without doubts, with doubts to you? He's found that one non-dual truth, which could be equated with the peace that passes all understanding, or transcendent bliss. So I do not know to whom, in whom or in relation with this joy and the sorrow people talk about exists. So that's where I'll sing these slokas on, these 4 slokas toward the end on tears. Basically, he's talking about not weeping, not crying tears on your own divine feet. Seems like him to be kind of a contradiction, that you would be crying or depressed or unhappy and crying about it, and then your own feet are divine. You're that divinity yourself, and you need to come to realize that. In order for all depression and dejection and all of that to go away once and for all, like it has for him. He sings it in so many beautiful ways, as we know. Kim nada rodisi sake najara na mrichur. Kim nada rodisi sake nacha janma dukam. Kim nama rodisi sake nachate vikara Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Kim namaro disi sake nachate svarupam Kim namaro disi sake nachate virupam Kim namaro disi sake nachate vayamsi Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Kim namaro disi sake nachate vayamsi Kim namaro disi sake nachate manamsi Kim namaro disi sake natavendriyani Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Kim namaro disi sake nachate stikama Kim namaro disi sake nachate praloba Kim namaro disi sake nachate vimoha Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham So instead of singing 3 verses, I went ahead and sang 4 because we backed up to last week's verse that had also mentioned tears in it, or weeping. So here's the English of that, so you can get the gist of where he's going with this, and sort of pitting joy against sorrow for us. But he said himself, I don't see why I have to do this. This is kind of what he's saying. Because I'm divine, I see you as divine, and there's just no reason for us to be allowing our minds to fall into such emotional depths and suffer because of that, and believe in an illusion to be true when really yourself is the only truth. And so this is something you can always use, you might say, as a more Advaitic exercise than what, say, the therapists or your friends are trying to tell you about, to cheer you up, as it were, because cheering you up often just ends against falling down again, and cheering up and falling down. So he's citing this practice that's of a non-dual nature, which is going to allow you to put up a default right away as soon as your mind begins to feel dejected. How can that be true? You immediately raise this sign of I am perfect to the devil, as it were, the devil of your own emotions and depressed mind. Now, how can that be happening? When I'm pure and divine, that's not possible to happen. It's obviously an illusion. I won't believe in it. And so you reject it out of hand, straight out. So it's the way in which Advaitic practices, if you could use the term, are utilized by these souls until that goes away forever. One day I woke up, my ignorance was gone, utterly gone. And so I didn't have to raise that sign anymore. It just didn't happen anymore. You got to the root of it, of the phantom, of the ghost in your mind, of the samskara, if you want to call it that, and you rooted it out, neutralized it, and then you became your true self again, whom you always were, always will be. So he says here in these verses, do not weep in dejection. Weep tears of joy. For you there exists neither old age or death. For you there is neither birth nor its sufferings. In you there can be no real disease. You are pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. Do you recognize it from last week? Because last week the teachings were on disease. The origin of disease is how we ended the class last week. So that's what he's saying here. For you, there can be no real disease. So that's what I was playing off of last week when I showed that chart on the origin of disease by Lord Vashisha's teachings to the young Sri Ram. Verse 35, do not weep with grief, shed tears of gratitude. Your form, perfect or defective, is inconsequential. Aging will not attend you, nor will real death. You are pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. Why drop tears of sadness on your own divine feet? Your gross senses are unreal. Your subtle senses are pure. Your body is five eternal elements. Your mind is a replicate of the Mahat. You are pure existence, wisdom, and bliss. Boundless as the sky, infinite like space. And so those are the verses on tears. At the end of verse 33, which we took last week, he says, so why waste time grieving? That's how he introduced these verses on weeping. And one more verse, he's saying, lust, greed, and other phenomena, what can they do to you? How can they harm you? You cry tears for things that have no real existence. You are boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So he comes at it from several different angles. For people with this problem of Vishada, depression, like Arjuna was in at the beginning of the Gita, or for people like Shobha, too much emotion showing all the time for every little happening. Even when it turns out that happening was mere nothing later, they still react to it. So you've got this very reactionary mind, emotional package, and its thoughts, which are out on a limb, as we were saying last week, and ready to fall into dejection at the slightest little thing. But then you've got this very steady example of the Avadhut here, and for beings like Swami Sheshananda that we just mentioned, and Swami Vivekananda, who brought the Vedanta here, who are steady as a rock. They're like this. See? They're like Shiva. That's the Shiva mudra. So they're unshakable and irrepressible. They're steady in their wisdom, sthiti pragnasya. And so that's the way they act. We had stories of Swami Vivekananda coming to the West, and whenever he'd see people who were in that state, he wouldn't understand it. It was kind of beyond his understanding because he was so positive all his life and lived around positive beings, his 15 monastic brothers and Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. And these people, of course, it's not like they didn't suffer and they didn't grieve or have sorrow for you, but for themselves, it would be misplaced because they were all realized in this sense. So if you see people who are illumined and they seem to fall under a veil of grief or things like that, you should know that that's for other people. They're feeling that. That's called compassion or empathy. And so they will cry tears for your condition. So then they'll try and better it right away, of course. So beautiful slokas there. And what I want to play off with today in the remaining hour or less is this verse that we just chanted where he says, your gross senses are unreal, your subtle senses are pure. Your body is 5 eternal elements, and your mind is a replicate of the Mahat. The individual mind comes from cosmic mind, the whole collective mind in between individual and cosmic mind comes from the Mahat. In that way, it's a qualified non-dual teaching. And you'd say that if you read the Upanishads and it says you're a spark off the fire, then that would be qualified non-dualism. But when you'd say that to a non-dualist, like we said that to our founder Lex Hixon once, he said, no, you're the whole fire. You didn't want to hear about sparks. So that's this Advaitic realization. You are the whole thing in total, because there's just no division between you. It's like the difference between the ocean and the wave. As long as the wave thinks it's a wave form, then it loses its wave form back into the ocean, and it can't figure out taking on form and leaving form. It gets confused whether it's the ocean or a wave. But finally it realizes it's water, and it puts to death all those distinctions. And that's what he's talking about here. These distinctions and differences have all gone away from me, and I just see myself as water. You see myself as the Atman, and I see you as the Atman, and I see everything else as the Atman, and it puts to flight all of these fancies and problems of the mind that's constantly going back and forth and not falling into one pat conclusion or one healthy decision. So I wanted to play off of that, because it seems like the Avadhut too is a knowledge of the Sankhya, because he's referencing here. He's referencing the five gross elements, the five subtle elements, the five gross senses and subtle senses, the tattvas, in other words. And then he's talking about your mind. And instead of saying, oh, your mind's confused, your mind's dual, or this and that, says, actually, it's just a replicate of the Mahat. So if you can trace your mind back to the Mahat, which is one of the meditations we do in dissolving the mind stream, is the penultimate aim is to get back to the cosmic mind. But the mind has thrown out all these feelers, five senses, five subtle senses, waking, dream, so it's like it's all outward going. The senses too, outward going, so therefore they're defective. People know the Mundaka Upanishad in this room. So the senses are defective because they're outward going by nature. So the mind is throwing all of these things out like an octopus at its limbs, only in fives instead of eights. So you want to draw it back in. Let's see. And then when the mind has all that contained in it and it realizes, oh, that's my projection, it's much the same as saying, oh, I realize that individual self is really the supreme self, or that spark of the fire is really the whole fire. It's really the bonfire. There cannot be any difference between them. I'm just seeing an expression of the entirety of it. Thought is that way too. You can have low thoughts, medium thoughts, intellectual thoughts, or very high thoughts, which are like huge suns burning in the night sky, Vivekananda said, if you had this great thought. So whichever way you trace it back through these tattvas, this is what this chest of consciousness chart was about when I made it some time ago. The Divine Mother herself says this: at the time of the great dissolution, I withdraw all beings and worlds back into my unmanifested Prakriti, while I myself disappear into the formless Brahman. When the dance of Maya begins again, I loose all things forth into the realms of becoming. All the while, nothing is born, nothing dies, nothing is created, nothing gets destroyed. Therefore, if you believe her, why drop tears of grief on your own divine feet? Because when your form disappears, when your five elements disappear back into the five senses, who are their origin, and those disappear back into the dream senses, which was their origin, and those disappear back into your mind, which is their origin, then your mind becomes non-dual and disappears back into her, and she disappears into Brahman. What's the problem here? See, why are you crying tears when philosophically you're straight? So this is called involution, but you should know that yourself, I put that in a God blog last week, never evolves, and it doesn't have to involve either. This is the mind complex that's doing this, and your consciousness happens to be along for a ride with it. Your ego, your thoughts, and your intelligence to till your intelligence can free itself from that idea of coming and going. Because where's the time in which the soul will come and go when all of time is actually in the soul? And where's the place where the soul will come and go to when all space is in the soul? See? So this is how Vivekananda played it back on itself to Westerners who were thinking in terms of evolution only, or Westerners who were thinking in terms of going to heaven or hell. See, those are the two things he was up against. Those are the two ways people think here, science or religion. Religion meaning Christianity in its immature fundamentalist state, not in the state that Christ was talking about. So if you have people like that peopling a nation, then you can well imagine that there are thousands of people who will suffer and cry tears of dejection. And you'll see that as you go out around the world. People come to me who are spiritual seekers, and they're crying when they meet me. We went to Swami Sheshananda and cried in front of him. Because that was for a different reason. Because you saw Holy Mother coming through him when you went to him. And so, you realize you were in the presence of divinity and your eyes would tear up. So that quote is a beauty from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. That's I could say this, there are dual scriptures, there are qualified non-dual scriptures. There are non-dual scriptures, then there's her. See, then there's Divine Mother scriptures, and there's really only two of them. They're both in India, and if you do have good English translations of them now, thanks to the Ramakrishna order, you can get a hold of them and be entirely in the land of the mother. We were talking about that yesterday as Mani Dvipa. One of the students asked about that, her jewel island of essence, where she herself has her own residence. Call it Antarvestini, if you want to speak about it in Kundalini. The subtle place inside, very subtle nerve, where she and her nectar of non-duality reside. Well, the rest of it is all the dance of Maya there. You see, there's Mahamaya, or you can call her Mahashakti. And there's this dance she's doing with her, in this case, two arms. And as she dances, there's this appearance of time and space, name and form and time and space going on. It's called projection. It's a sustenance and withdrawal, or Shrishti Sthiti Laya, we call that. You can sing a song about that. Shrishti Sthiti Laya Naihetai is beautiful words that they're using about this projection that's going on that is dazzling everyone. Again, with the mind, with its senses going outward, sees nature and believes in evolution and change and so forth, and transformations going on, and also believes in its own death, although it doesn't think about it much, and thought it was born from somewhere, and doesn't know where it's going or where it came from. That's this hypnotization we're talking about that happens to so many souls who live that way and form a habit of believing in things that are illusory, like grief. And it's called a great trap in India, grief. And it's one of the three great bondages, they call it. So it's not that it's not natural to a certain extent, but ultimately it's not real. And if whatever you're grieving for happened to leave your sight, then you have to know that it went back inside. And you'll only know that it went back inside of you and that you are parcel responsible for projecting it if you trace that yourself. It's like going too far into the forest and then having to retrace the trail back to your home before dark. You know what I mean by that. So Srishti Sthiti Laya is there. And then you see these chest of drawers, as they call this, the ancient chest of consciousness. Everything's contained in it. There you see the drawers and the dresser itself, Ishvara Avatar, and then the Trinity occupy the top shelf, and the word is there, Om. And then the first drawer of that, where we come at it from the top right now. Sometimes we go at it from the bottom up, but that would be your causal realm or your deep sleep state, or this Mahanidra that she's talking about. When everything goes into sleep, she falls back into Brahman and immerses there, holds herself there. So that's called Karna Jagat. So that Karna means cause. So that's the cause of everything. This is formlessness. That'd be a good thing to think about when you wonder about formless meditation. How am I going to do that? Is it really real, or is it just a pipe dream someone had? See, because all I like to do is say meditate on the form of Sri Ramakrishna or the form of Sharada. But they tell me that I should be meditating on formlessness too. How am I going to do that? So you should remember that everything starts off in a formless state. All of nature does so too. So if it's good enough for them, it should be good enough for you. See, and you should be able to envision that there's an essence in formlessness that you can, as it were, grab onto. You can hang your hat there and find inside of that emptiness, so-called emptiness, shunyata, the fullness of consciousness, purnyata. But we're coming out right now. So from the top drawer, where everything's tucked away in formlessness, like clothes that are nicely ironed and folded and put in the top drawer, when you get down to the second drawer of consciousness, then that's subtle worlds called Sukshma Jagat. And that's where dreaming is taking place, or these forms that were in abeyance and seeds were watered, and all of a sudden they start taking subtle forms, like your dreams. What a power the human being has to envision and to dream and to imagine. That's a great power it has in itself, but it needs to control that power and direct it. Otherwise, of course, it can get out of hand, and we know that in the gross state. That Stula Jagat is the next drawer, the waking state. That's where everything has been pulled out of the drawer and is being worn and getting dirty. It needs to be washed and ironed again and put back in the other two drawers. So this is the way I was thinking when I was thinking of an ancient chest of consciousness, how forms are being put away and then taken back again, and how, as she said so beautifully up here, all the time, nothing dies, nothing's born, nothing changes. It's again one of these Advaitic or non-dual advantages you have if your love goes towards the formless reality, like Sri Ramakrishna's did. It's not like he didn't put quite a lot of attention on form, including the formless form of Mother Kali. But he also had visions of all the gods and goddesses, and gods and goddesses visited him in multitudes, says one line of the Ramakrishna Upanishad. Who's ever had an Upanishad written about them just after they passed away? Sidelights. Over here, if you're used to looking at coverings as being a part of the dance of Maya, something that you need to kind of disidentify with as not being yourself, well, then you see these three doors correlate pretty nicely with the Annamaya Kosha in the lower drawer. That's your body sheath. Then these three, your energy, your mind, and your thought correlate with the subtle drawer, the subtle worlds. And the Anandamaya Kosha, your ego, especially when it's ripe, goes back into this formless state called the Anandamaya Kosha. So the five sheaths are all something that you take on as you come through these states. Oh, I'm going to need this for that. Or I'm not going to be able to go into that world until I have the ability to produce some form. And I need the form to be in three ways. I need it to be in the form of thought first. I need it to be in the form of mind next. I need it to be in the form of energy next. So I'm going to select those three and wrap myself in them. Then I can get into the second world. And now I want to have a physical body and physical senses and enjoy the five elements. I'm going to need another form for that. See, so I'm going to select that out of this pantheon of imaginative things that are contained within the mind at gross, subtle, causal level, all the way back to the Mahat. I'm going to have to select those which are, I have I have access to, and use that to produce a physical form. I think my parents will help me with this. There's some people down there who've already done this. I'll follow them. On the other side, you can see how these three drawers can correlate to objects. So sometimes it might have been something you stumbled upon in your own philosophical deliberations. You say, well, I think I know what happens to human beings. Heaven, earth, hell, samsara, nirvana, liberation, bondage. You can do it with the soul, but then you kind of have this lagging doubt about insects, animals, and plants. Let's see, and also what happens to them, objects. What happens to them as I'm doing this so-called metamorphosis from one world to the next, or from one body to the next, or from one sheath to a subtler sheath. Even if I'm doing it every 24 hours, but if I'm doing it every lifetime, well, this is how it happens to them. See, so basically, if we started at the bottom, it'll start at the top, since that's the way we're doing it. All objects are seed essences. They have words for them, bijams, and those seed essences are, as it were, lodged in your indeterminate state, in potential. Call it deep sleep for now, or karna jagat. It's where all the potential for objects comes from. That's why it's called causal. It's the cause of everything that will happen later in time, when time and space get moving. For any given soul, or in any given cycle, like yuga to Mahayuga. It's very multifaceted, her dance. So all objects as seed essences. So now, it's not that much different than looking at a tree and saying, came from a seed, right? But now you know that there's a treeness of the tree, as Swami Vivekananda put it, and there's silverness to silver, and there's maleness to a man, and femaleness to a woman, and there's goldness in gold. He's talking about these are the essences of things. So he's looking right through the form into their origin, and he's looking 2 or 3 times back, 2 or 3 layers back to this potential. So you are witnessing that. Things are actually coming out of that. See, that's why they're unreal and you're not. See, that's why they change and you don't. If you identify with them, you think you change. If you identify with them, you think you're born and die like they do. If you identify them, you think you were created and destroyed like they are. That's the difference between you and objects. Objects here meaning animals, insects, and plants too. They're bits of prana out of the pranamaya kosha. Where's their mind? Animals a little bit into the mind, but not very far. Senses totally fixated on the earth. Unfortunately, can't use that as a very good metaphor because so many people are also, their senses are also focused on the earth only, on matter. Anyway, this is how to see back in terms of your sheaths that you've taken on, and how to see back in terms of the seeds of nature. So that's why I think this chart is a really good one to look at in footfalls of the Indian rishis, and give a good study of it. It gives a good cross-section of Vedanta and Samkhya here. If you come down to that second drawer, well, that's where all of these seeds and bijams show themselves up as thoughts and mental constructs. That's why the mind is working on them and is turning them into subtle forms. Those are called dreams. Those are also called heaven, or lokas, or bardos, or akashas. Again, she has provided for all of this with the 5 ethers. And you're then visiting the 5 ethers, but having to accommodate to them, just like a paramecium did, and then a monkey did, through this sweep of physical time that it got caught in, and began to change itself and evolved on one world only. So it had to adapt itself to these various levels of matter that were changing all the time. In the same way, coming from the involved state out to the evolved state in that kind of dream it's having, and it also has to adapt itself to these various vibrational things. So you're going to be adapting yourself to being, seeing seeds, watering them, turning them into forms, lands, bodies, and elements. And it's all done by the soul, by looking at these as it dreams them, and then saying, I like that, I dislike this, and I'm going to fashion this, I'm going to fashion this, and I'm going to go rule over it. See, that's what a lot of the asuras are doing. And that's why they show up here wanting to dominate over people. As back in their subtle state, they had planned this, but their minds weren't so pure, and they had designs on the world. Prakriti layas, they're called. That's not liars, but they do turn into liars, but it's laya. It's that word up here. That Shrishti Sthiti Laya. Which I've actually put there as lila to sportive play on to complete the circle. So out of seeds to subtle forms, the third drawer is where these physical forms become matter, where these forms become physical and get congealed into matter. You can see that happening with water, ice, and vapor. So it's not that hard to believe that it can happen with anything else. If you see 3 transformations in one element, then it shouldn't be that hard to believe how transformations happen in the mind too, and you can fashion worlds in space and time at different levels. 5 different ethers is how they're explaining that to us. Well, that's basically it. I mean, he says here, your gross senses are unreal. That is, they don't last. Your subtle senses are pure, because that's where everything inside came from. Your body is 5 eternal elements. Those elements will continue on. As you go into dream, you'll have 5 elements there to form your heavens and your lands, your pure lands even. And your mind is a replicate of the Mahat. Krishna says, verily I have my manifested form and my unmanifested form. Beyond both is my supremely unmanifested form. So he's giving Sri Arjuna that teaching in the Gita too, this very teaching, is that I have my manifested form. That's basically, back then he called it the pure Astika body, 5 elements in the mind. But then I have my unmanifested form. Basically he's speaking about prana, the life force by which everything is upheld. It's a straight quote out of the Sanskrit in the Gita. So that's life force isn't seen here, right? I mean, except it's acting. We see, we hear, we touch, we taste, we smell, we move. But that's all because of the prana is flowing through everything, but it's not seen. So that's why he calls it my unmanifested form. It's sustaining everything here. But people don't, that's why Vivekananda came here and said, you've lost track of the prana. And since you've lost track of the prana, you've lost track of the psychic prana. Because the psychic prana is what's doing all of this solidifying. From seeds to thought, to gross objects, back to seed, back to thought, back to subtle object, or back to causal state. It's just like, again, easiest way to explain it is deep sleep, dreaming and waking. Jesus said, in my Father's mansion there are many chambers, abiding places, homes of rest and peace, and sojourn. So you can go back and rest in these, but you might have this wanderlust again to come back and dream again. It's places of sojourn, playing in the fields of the Lord, much like this word lila is used in terms of the Hindu traditions. And these 2 quotes are from an American scientist that I like very much, who is thinking Vedantically. He said, as we inspect it over periods of time, the universe begins to look more to us like a great thought rather than a great machine. Sir James Jeans said that. He also said, mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We are beginning to suspect that we ought to rather hail it as the creator and governor of this realm. Yeah, that's where you read your Samkhya and you studied your yoga and you got interested in yogic psychology and you parted company with other scientists who believed in matter only and didn't know anything about mind or its consciousness or its origins in another realm, at another level of vibration. What to speak of coming from a non-dual essence. That's why I say you have to see back more than one level, 2 levels, 3 levels. Now you're getting to see the truth. The light shines back there. Here it only turns into glimmers and glares and gets obscured. All right, there's a more personal way of putting this that we can maybe attach onto more. And that's the contemplation chart using Sri Ramakrishna as our model. So here we are looking again at your body is eternal elements, your mind is a replicant of God's mind, and your senses are unreal, your gross senses are pure, but also says here that you are pure existence, wisdom, and bliss. So he's giving us the truth of the matter is our formless nature, and then all of the add-ons that come in when the mind begins to think. Now there's the 5 koshas that we just looked at the other chart. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya kosha. That's called Panchakosha, or the 5 sheaths. And there's the image of Sri Ramakrishna at the crown of his head represents then cosmic mind. And in the cosmic mind, you see 5 different ethers that I was just talking about. There's the physical ether, where plants, animals, insects, and human bodies are occupying. There's the pranakasha, where your ancestors are occupying. There's the mind and its thoughts, its intelligence, and its ultimate consciousness, chitakasha. Those are called the 5 akashas. Bhutakasha, Pranakasha, Chitakasha, Jnanakasha, and Chid Akasha. Beautiful teachings back from Lord Vashishta in that. And that cosmic mind, you can see it when it comes down, it comes out of the chest of drawers, say maybe to the 2nd drawer that we were just talking about. It's got 4 things to it that the seers recognize. It's called the Antakarana, the inner cause of all. And that's called its thought, chitta. It's mind, which is dual by nature, so that it can draw forth from that duality all sorts of multiplicity. That's called manas. And ahamkara, the ego, and the buddhi, the intellect, is a 4-fold package that is there under the cosmic mind's auspice. Because the cosmic mind also has these 4 things, but in a much, much more refined state. And that you'd look to Ishvara for that, or even to the Mahat, or the Trinity, sometimes they call that. You'd look to them to find out how pure and selfless their egos are, how high and non-dual their thoughts are, and how non-dual their mind has become, and how refined their intellect has become. You'd look to that to see that they also have this 4-fold complex, but it's much more matured as one goes in towards it, especially in meditation. So there you see, there are five things there. If you put the cosmic mind in, there are 5 things here. There are 5 things here. So there are 5 things that come out of here, and there are 5 things that come out of that here. So it's just coming down in sets of 5s. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, they laud that seer. Says he looked at everything and studied it, and he began to see that everything is coming out in a series of 5s. And then he saw he had 5 fingers, he had 5 toes, and he had 5 senses, and all these essential things that accompanied him, came in sets of 5s. So you're experiencing the 5-fold universe with your 5-fold mind, through the fivefold senses in 5 akashas. See, so very beautiful and a very wonderful way to look at the Adidaiva Vidya, the ancient wisdom, which the seers looked out upon the universe. And you know what I'm talking about now, what he's describing to us in this last verses. And to him, he wouldn't read that and start crying. And left here trapped in it. And he thought it was the only reality. But he's looked through the sets of 5s and used them and come back to the triputis and come back to the dualities and then come back to non-duality from there and then celebrated. Don't cry tears of grief, shed tears of joy, he says. When he completed the inward examination process, then he came to that conclusion that gave him that ananda or that bliss or that elation that's so well known in the Vedanta and in the yoga darshanas of India. Well, it just so happens that when you look out here on earth, you'll see 5 kinds of beings: rishis, gods, ancestors, humans, and then put them into one if you want: animals, insects, and plants. So basically there are these different beings. You see, I've connected the 5 subtle elements to his fingers and thumb on the right hand, and the 5 senses of cognition to his fingers and thumb of the left hand. Senses are on one side, subtle and gross. Elements are on the other, subtle and gross. So I hope you are tracing it back to these chests of drawers. See, that's why I say we can take it away from just the cosmological, philosophical side of things. We can make it more personal and show how it manifests itself in just coincidentally in 5s, you could say. Because we're not through with the 5s yet. There are also 5 kinds of life force they talk about, 5 pranas. Count them with me. Inhale, hold, exhale, and hold. And then digestion, throw that in there with the breathing process. And you'll find out that there's these 5 kinds of prana: one that takes in, one that expels, one that holds, one that's always the same, and one that's rising or going inward all the time. That prana that's going inward, they like to catch that, because with that, like, they can take a Garuda bird and fly to the land of Vishnu, as it were, or to Mani Dvipa if you're seeking the mother of the universe. And all of these pranas then there at his knees, if you were, as it covers his whole form, this whole cosmic outlay, and Sri Ramakrishna being the archetypical soul, who's the best being, personage to put there for this. You can make these connections later yourself. Audibility to hearing, tangibility to feeling, visibility to seeing, flavor to tasting, odor to smelling. Are they the same things? I mean, is each couple the same? Because you hear something, but you only hear what's audible. So it has to coexist with air that vibration goes across. So that's where you'll find air associated with these subtle and gross elements. Audibility, hearing go with ether, and then tangibility, feeling go with air, and visibility, seeing go with fire. That makes sense, you see. So you can follow them all down, but you can also follow them over to the senses of action, which are speaking, handling, moving, procreation, and excretion. Those I've connected up to his 5 toes, at the base of everything, at his holy feet. Maybe just to give it more veracity and explanation, we can read this quote. A human being has 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes on both feet, sports 5 active and 5 cognitive senses. The mind is also 5-fold, including dual mind, its thoughts, its intellect and ego, and if counted, the cosmic mind that it is a part of. The life force or prana that connects all of these facets is also 5-fold. When accounted for, these sets of 5s convey a broad hint to the soul that the days of its body-mind mechanism are both symbolic and numbered, and that meditation on quintuplications is needed. That's what the father of yoga came forward later with this system of copula and said, let's meditate on each of these now. We'll start with earth, and then we'll go to water, then we'll go to fire, and we'll go to air, and we'll go to ether, and let's connect it up with everything, like a trail of breadcrumbs, and we'll find out where the origins of all these are, because they're telling them they're outward only, and they started with energy, a big bang, say, and that they all came out of matter, and there was no consciousness before matter that was operating the show. So it doesn't make that much sense to us. Plus, we're interested in non-duality because we just awaken to the fact that there's something beyond relativity through the grace of the Lord, as Avadhut said. So now we want to know how to trace ourselves inward back to the source, at least as far as the projection of the mind goes. What happened with all of this 4-fold mind? It was so powerful that it was able to project all this. Sankalpa, Vikalpa. And that's how powerful a critter it is, you see. But I'm not the mind, I'm the master of the mind. If I'm the master of the mind, then I should be able to inhale it back in. See, I exhaled it, right? Now I should be able to inhale it back in. I projected it, I should be able to withdraw it. In fact, I projected it, played with it for a while. And if I didn't get stuck in it, then I can just draw it back in because I know it's just a play. It's a dream I was having, and I'm going to wake up for it now. And all of space will wake up and be detracted at the same time. And all of time will go away, and it'll just be one breath a minute that happened. And all the time, this grand vibration is going on underneath it, called the Word. Further, with the 5s, living beings formulate their bodies amidst the 5 gross elements of nature and play in the dream state using 5 subtle elements. 5 sheaths enfold and engross them, associated with 5 levels of ether called akashas. They are subject at birth to 5-fold aspects of Maya called name, form, time, space, and causality. I didn't have room to put that here. Good to note, though. And the relations include 5 types of beings: animals, humans, ancestors, devas, and rishis. Whether consciously or not, they always live eternally by 5 great spiritual laws. And that also is not here, but we can look at that in another chart. So now we've looked at 2 of these verses that have to do with 5 senses, 5 elements, and gross, and then 5 senses, 5 elements subtle, and the 5-fold mind, and the 5 akashas and 5 pranas, all why he says in relation to this, you should neither suffer the idea of birth nor death. You'll never have any real disease. You'll never age. Your soul will not age. And you'll not come to any real death because of this verse 36, because all of this is eternal, and it's a constant play under the dance of Maya by the Divine Mother. And your very form proves it to yourself. See, if you'll just look at your very form, like look in the mirror and see yourself. See, even your physical body is saying, is telling you this kind of wisdom. Or if you go out and instead of just enjoy nature, you study nature, then nature will tell you these things too. That's why they say you should sit. Krishna says in the Gita, you should go someplace, maybe near a quiet stream, sit on a rock, not too high, not too low. Think of me in your mind, draw your breath in, meditate upon the Lord in the heart, and then fix the life force in the head, and meditate out in nature, and feel the peace there, which people do, and then begin to make the connections, everything outward to the internal. Purnamadaha, Purnamidam, Purnat Purnamudachyate. From the internal, the external has come, but now I want to see it go back to the internal. And I want to see how I did this, how I fell asleep, how I started dreaming, and now I want to wake up. So last week I put out that God blog that was titled, "Don't Follow Your Dreams, Awake from Them." I've always wanted to put that silly New Age teaching into the right context, so I did. Don't follow your dreams, awake from them. That's the ultimate. That's what Vedanta tells you to do. The dream's not real, and you spend too much time, you waste too much time dreaming yourself in this way, that way, and all the time you're subject to all of these problems that are causing you to think that death is real, causing you to think that suffering is real, causing you to think that grief is real, causing you to be too emotional and lose center, and lose your equilibrium, and what to speak of lose remembrance of your true nature and the source from which it comes. Your true nature is lodged right there in Mother Reality, in the Mahashakti herself. So we can infer, if it hasn't already been well expressed and proven, that he's a master of Samkhya Yoga, this Avadhut, and he's using it as one of the great systems in which to base this non-dual truth that he's trying to communicate to us on. And in that way, we're getting the top and the bottom of everything, like the head and the feet. Now we have to fill in the middle. So to fill in the middle, we're going to have to go towards these other verses, how he's rendered all this into a practice that has had him prove it all to himself. See? It's not an imagination outright. It's not a put on or just a show, but it's something that he engaged in out of his own consciousness, and he found out. I mean, it should be rather obvious when he says, "You are wonderful. See, you are boundless as the sky, and infinite like space, and there is no death and no birth or sufferings for you." He's going on and on, stating that he has found this about his true self. And he's looking at you and seeing the very same essence. Only, how many veils have you dropped in front of it? Veils of grief, veils of belief in birth and death, veils of ignorance about the Adidaiva Vidya, where your body, mind, and all the worlds came from. Are they just a Maya projection and illusion, or did you have any part in fashioning them or fabricating them yourself? And if you did, you could also undo them and dissolve them, including time and space, and cause and effect, your karmas. You should also be able to dissolve those back into this ultimate. So I brought this chart so if we had any extra time, we could see the kind of practices that a soul like that would engage in order to come to this incomparable non-dual truth that we talk about in Advaita Vedanta. And we call this Sattva Guna, transcending reflections and liberating methods of Advaita. So you can start from the bottom, it's best in the chart like this. We could even start with that quote by Shankar at the bottom right. He says, when the veiling power disappears, the distinction between the universe and Brahman becomes clear. And change is then perceived in phenomena only, never in Brahman. It's like I was saying, Holy Mother said, you realize God only in spirit, not in the world. If you're trying to find God here in the world, you're looking for God in all the wrong places. You have to find it where it is, in the spirit, which is transcendent of the world. Otherwise, a study like these two, is showing you everything about the worlds, the five Akashas and so forth, and how they made their appearance. But you want to know where they appeared from and how they have their foundation, how they hold their foundation. That's in your mind, of course. So these practices are basically to purify the mind. Basically, in that bottom box on the left, you have to purify the gunas. Today I was calling them the three gunic guards. Basically, a changing of the gunic guards. That's what I was saying. So you heard the changing of the guard. Well, that's what happens in your mind. There's changing of the gunic guard all the time. One guard is tamasic and he looks over and your mind's depressed. And then the active guard comes on into his post and you get restless. And then sattva balance comes and you feel good. And then the changing of the gunic guard goes on again and again. And they switch places all the time throughout this 24-hour vigil, you might say, every day and night of your life. So this experience is robbing you of your consciousness, these gunas, because they're the first thing out of this dance. Some of these qualities will have to be there in order to form the worlds, these gunas of nature. For nature itself to come, they belong to nature. So that's when a soul begins to see that, they're calling that mixed sattva. And so we're right now assuming that you're big and broad enough to get over tamas and rajas. You don't need to be depressed anymore, and you don't need to be rajasic or restless anymore. You can be peaceful. And they've given you the permission and the wisdom and the philosophy and the practices to do that. Now what you've got left in what great souls like the Avadhut probably found out as they were, as it were, working to remember their true nature, the best way of saying it, is that the quality of sattva was a bit mixed yet. Like, for instance, adarpana is there. There's the absence of pride. Darpana is pride. So basically, when that begins to disappear, then pure sattva begins to make its appearance. So pure sattva, if you had just sattva, you'd be likely to enjoy your life without too many things getting in the way. And if things did get in the way and you didn't react, then you'd be free of rajas and tamas. But sattva can become a sort of habit. So, I'm just living a very nice life now, and if everything goes on this way and I don't react to things that happen in the world or to me from others, like the three kinds of suffering we looked at last Wednesday night at class, then I've pretty much gotten rid of this tendency towards mixed sattva, and I'm beginning to have pure sattva. That means that when I have some time, I want to go read this. I really like reading these. You see, like that first sloka I was just telling you about, that it's through the grace of God that wise beings all of a sudden get non-duality in their mind. Otherwise, where is it? Where did it come from? Where have you ever heard it? Does it even exist? Maybe in a little school of monks somewhere in a distant country, they have a little idea about it, but you've never heard of it. You don't know where to find it if you do hear of it. Nobody's ever talked about it to you, except maybe in little tiny mentions that may have leaked into the culture or into people's minds. Like, I and my father are one. Somebody said that. So maybe you thought about that as you were growing up. But you didn't know at all what it meant. And if you tried to know what it meant, everyone slapped you down. You're not one with the Father. Nonsense. So then you have to go looking for someone who can explain that to you, like an Avadhut. So Adharpana is there. Beneficial denial is called yama, and observance of spiritual practices is called niyama. So you're beginning to take those into consideration. People in Western psychology worry about repression of desires and so forth. But when you're in spiritual practice and they say you have to try and fulfill your desires or dissolve your desires, then that's a beneficial rejection you're talking about, because these things are obviously weighing you down. So you're going to have to find unique ways of fulfilling or neutralizing or sublimating your desires. And Vedanta, Yoga, and Tantra give you those three. Faith in God, Shraddha, devotion to Ishvara, Bhakti, desire for liberation, mumukshutvam, a divine nature and renunciation, daiva and nivritti, are traits of mixed sattva. So if you have those springing up in you, they're not fully matured yet, obviously, because that would be a non-dual state like he's living in. But if you find these in you, then you know that sattva is trying to make its march on the upper gates of your mind, on the palace, wants to burst through the closed gates of your mind and open them up. Pure sattva would be pure prasadam, atmik sada. It would be to realize that you're blissful by nature. Now you're speaking Avadhut's language. It's self-realization, anubhuti. It's supreme peace, prashanti. And it's joyous and cheerful, triptihi praharshaha. With the gunas mastered, we could just say that right now, like these beings are mastering the slope, and they're going to feel very good by doing this. They feel very good about themselves, but it's not quite done yet. So great beings like the Avatar, the Avatar for sure, but the Avadhut is telling you in these earlier verses that we've looked at over the last several months that we've been in the study, telling you about these mic reflections. You see, many perplexities of life I have suffered, but I have mastered them. There's a sunrise in the morning, a sunset at dusk, but I don't see any real change taking place. I, the Avadhut, am never free of actions, but I always engage in the highest acts. I see the gods, but I see them merge in Brahman, ultimately. These are all reflections that he's noticed in his life. And I'll just read 4 of those really quickly of ones we studied over the past few weeks. You could go through them and look at this power of ajasa, how something gets reflected, or like vivarta, sometimes Vedanta calls it, thinking gets covered or just reflected. There's a difference between covering power and reflective power. Covering is just like you would never think there was anything to search for, but if you see a reflection, it causes you to wonder where the source is. Covering power, you don't think about a source. So those are called avarana and vikshepa shakti when those get into the mix. But if you're getting beyond the sattvas, the gunas, then these reflections become, the covering powers get stripped away more and more, and you're seeing more and more of reflection, and the reflection you're seeing is becoming more of a revelation to you. Your consciousness all of a sudden withdraws from the reflecting power itself and sees the source behind it. The source could be your own ignorance. The source could be the Divine Mother or Brahman. So you're beginning to be able to distinguish. Does it sound familiar? As she said, you're being able to distinguish Viveka Vairagya style about the distinctions and differences there. So here's an example in these few minutes remaining of some ability of transcending these reflections as you move upward in this climb of discrimination and viveka vairagya. So freedom while embodied equals disembodied freedom. Knowing that perceiving difference from Brahman brings fear. Celebrating the glory of the indivisible self. Dealing with ignorance via abidance in the Atman. Observing the unreality of the world via constant discrimination. Remaining of cheerful mind and disposition. Seeing that the real is blissful while the unreal brings suffering. Being clear that there is no freedom for body-bound souls. Again, these would have been better taken from the bottom up because we are doing an ascending thing here, or an inward ascension is what I like to call it. So you can see as you're doing this inward climb towards the heights of the first visions of non-dual reality, then these will be things that are beginning to disappear. First, they're becoming more obvious to you, and when they become more obvious, you can do away with them. That is, you don't want to be body bound anymore, which is why you went back and and studied, the 5 elements and the 5 senses and all that. So you'll know specifically what you're not, and you could say neti neti to it. See, you're just a person with 5 senses. Well, actually, yeah, I don't identify with them. You see, I have 5 senses, but they're not. I'm not those 5 senses. Most people are living their lives essentially just in those 5 senses. That's where their life consists of. About there, in this inward ascension, you come to pure yogic balance. These 3 birds are circling nicely, symbolizing pure yogic balance. And about that time, then, you come upon these liberating methods of Advaita Vedanta. For those of you who are very, very specific about, forgive the term. Advaita Vedanta is just a realization of your true nature. So you wouldn't want to necessarily tack on the idea of a method to it. But that's what you call Advaita Vedanta sadhana. After the Advaita is already seen and you've already attained it, like the Avadhut has, then there are still chances of falling out of that because of the changing of the gunic guards and other reasons too. So you can use these as cloths to polish the mirror of your mind, if you want to put it that way. It's how Shankara put it. Let's start from the bottom this time. Exerting effort towards eliminating false seeing. Bhranti Darshana. It's one of the 9 antarayas of yoga. So you want to be able to look at something. I'm not saying about these eyes because everything you see with these eyes is false, basically. But you're talking about inner perception now. So with your inner perception, you want to see everything clearly. And so that's going to have to do with your dreaming state, your deep sleep state, your spiritual practices, any insights you have, your revelation of divine reality, and your vision of Ishvara. All of those things have to do with your inner perception. Your outer perception is like you just said here, I don't even go there. I'm not interested in it anymore. I'm not it, and there's no reality there in it. It is one of the verses we just sang. So it's my inner perception I want to make sure is clear. If thine eye be single, you should know the truth, not otherwise. Otherwise, it's vimoda. Vimoha, as Krishna says in the Gita. So you have to exert effort towards eliminating false seeing. That's what I just said. It's an Advaitic tool that you can, a red light will go off. He's talking about a sign you can hold up towards ignorance when it comes your way, but a red light will go on and say, I don't believe that. That's not coming from pure perception. That's an overlay. It's a conditioning. It's a karma. It's a samskara. It's something from the past. It's something not in the present. So you become very good. The Avadhut would become very good at immediately seeing that and backing away from it. Other people might run towards it and accept it. Then consciously destroying the seeds for rebirth. There's where we go to Father of Yoga and so forth. That problem of clinging to life, abhinivesha, or fear of death. If you believe in death, then of course rebirth is going to be following you around like a little puppy. But if you destroy the idea of death, which he's telling here, there is no death for you. There's no real death, is what he says. There's no real death for you. There's just this assumed death that happens in that body-mind mechanism. That comes and goes, but you're witnessing it all the time. So if you have that realization, then this other is not going to be a problem. You're not going to need to destroy seeds for rebirth because you don't die. Nam Ritur Nashanka Name Jati Beda. I never had a death because I was never born in the first place. So you're really, doing a one-upmanship on Maya and its problem of false seeing. The mind's falling into that misconception about itself. You don't want to allow that. So wherever these seeds are coming from, I want to destroy them. And isn't it much like this third drawer? All the seeds there. I have to make sure that I have them tended well, and I'm only watering the ones I want. If there's such a thing as a seed for non-duality, I think I'll put all the rest away and just water that for a while. Then noting clear distinction between the seer and the seen. Carefully observing avarana and vikshepa shakti. I jumped the gun on that. Nicely so a few minutes ago. That's that power of veiling and the power of distorting. So something's veiled, people aren't going to usually find it. Something's distorted, they're going to fall into the deception that it's not what it really is. It's something other than it really is. So the yogi, or the Avadhut, because I connected the two last week and said that the practice of an Avadhut is really very yogic. So we think that you get to an Advaitic state, best of all, through this practice of traditional yoga, which would include with it, obviously, Samkhya, which we're talking about here, and which he's singing about here in verse 35. It's a lot of Samkhya in there. That's a part of the realization that comes about. So who else is going to be able to jump from here, to the leader, from the bottom to the top of the mountain, and tell you about avarana and vikshepa shakti? They have words for it. So if somebody who's suffering, you say, guess what? The truth is being veiled to you right now. Really? Or, that's a distortion you're suffering under. I can show you the real thing, the original. You don't have to suffer the distortion, the imitation anymore. Who can do that for you? So you'd have to go and find some specialized souls who know about, guess what? It's called avarana, vikshepa, and prakasha. We have words for it. We've had words for it for thousands of years. It's in our ancient books. And we've studied it, we've used it, and we got free with them. You can too, see. I like to put things against each other like that in a kind of context, or even bring them out of context for a while, because you're thinking about, I'm learning about veiling and distorting power. But you have to remember too that these are tools and truths that have been there from time out of mind in India, in these systems. And you're not finding any mention of them at all in your society, in your upbringing, in your religion here in the West in this day and age. There's not a trace of them. If they were heard of, they'd be the devil's work. But it really describes the devil very nicely, avarana and vikshepa. If you want to give the devil more credence to exist, then start talking about the veiling power and the distorting power of consciousness. That's the devilish thing that's happening to people, where they cannot see their true nature, that they're one with the Father. always denying the non-self or ego self. Sorry, that's from the non-self. Sorry, that's also from the non-self. So he's doing a good job of that here. For these tears are frying grief, sorry, those are non-dual. Those are non-self tears. They're falling from my ego. They're not falling from my Atman. My Atman doesn't cry. So, like, if it does cry, it's tears of elation that we're looking at there. Tears of mature bhakti. So then, it gets finer and finer. So now nurture the Brahman state. Now that you know it exists, it's true, it's real, and you've stripped away all the coverings from it, celebrate it. Nurture the Brahman state. Shankara has beautiful teachings on that, about non-denial of Brahman. So he'll also put it in terms of negative towards a positive. If this comes along, anyone comes along, or any religion that's not developed, or any culture that's not well thought, any theories and so forth come along, and they're not in accordance with this non-dual truth that you know is the reality, then you can deny them. Always deny the non-self, and then you can affirm at the same time the existence of the Brahman state. Nurture it. Never be a detractor, always be a supporter of the Dharma, as how Sri Ram put that in the Adhyatma Ramayana. Never be a detractor of the Dharma, always be a supporter. Just the Dharma leads to Atmagyan, Atmagyan leads to non-duality. Knowing the self-Atman as the truth in all, and contemplating perfect union with Brahman, always. These are some of the liberating methods of Advaita Vedanta that we could put in a very rare and special list that, again, are not heard that often, and would be something that you might discover towards the top of your climb, this climb into the heights of non-dual awareness. Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Jananim shadadam devim Ramakrishnam jagadgurum Pado padme toye shritva pranamami muhur muhur. Pranamami muhur